I call this meeting to order, and we're live, and we are now live. So I'd like to start the meeting off with our acknowledgement of the traditional lands.
The land upon which we work, live, and sustain ourselves is the ancestral and treaty lands of the Michizagig Anishinaabe, also known today as the Mississaugas of the Credit, the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land. We also recognize the rich pre-contact history and relationships which include the Anishinaabe and the Ongwe-Hongwe.
Since European contact, this land continues to be home to Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. As responsible community members, we value the diversity, dignity, and worth of all people.
Colonialism displaced and dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their ancestral land
and continues to deny their basic human rights, dignities, and freedoms.
We are committed to learning true history to reconcile, make reparations, and fulfill our treaty obligations to the original peoples and our collective responsibilities to the lands, water, animals, and each other for future generations.
Thank you. So now we'll go to the approval agenda. Before we approve the agenda, we're going to add a item 6.1 under the delegations by Noah Farber for a conversation on the days of the significance calendar. As you may, and I'll remind you, the process for delegation, you have up to 48 hours prior to the meeting to send in a delegation form in which you can get added. So that met the criteria. And so we're now adding that. So can I have someone put this new agenda on the floor? Trustee Alves puts it on the floor, seconded by Trustee Bailey. All those in favor?
Aye.
Approval? Thank you. Online. And so we now have approval of the agenda. So we'll go to item 4, declaration of conflict of interest. Do I see any conflict of interest here? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5, which is approval of the minutes of our previous meeting on March 6th. So can I have someone put that on the floor? I'll use Trustee McDonald, which put on the floor, seconded by Trustee Benjamin. So any comments, questions, or changes to the minutes for approval? Seeing none. So all those in favor of the minutes from the previous meeting will be passed. Okay, we'll move on to item 6.1, delegation. Has our delegate been able to log in? Okay, so I believe Noah Farber, we have you online. This is you have up to 10 minutes to, as part of our rules. I assume you've reviewed the rules on which delegates perform. There's also a code of conduct that I hope would like you to ensure that you follow. After the delegation, just to give you and the audience, we get the trustees an opportunity to ask any questions of clarification only. And after that, then we as trustees decide the action to do with your delegation, and then we move on. Do you have any questions before you start?
Just want to make sure you can hear me okay?
Absolutely. So
right.
Please start.
Perfect. Well, good evening, and thank you very much to the members of this committee for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. I come before you as a member of the Peel Jewish community, a proud parent of 2 children attending Peel schools, and as someone who grew up within the Peel school system. There have been some very troubling decisions made by PDSB that have politicized our schools and contributed to unsafe environments that are not conducive to learning. Specifically, the decision by the board to include Nakba Remembrance Day on the Peel District School Board's official calendar of days of significance is one of deep concern that has profound impacts on our education system. Now, the term Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic, asserts that the recreation of the State of Israel, the ancestral home of the Jewish people, was a catastrophic event for Palestinians. A narrative that fails to acknowledge the nuanced historical context surrounding the events of 1948, where conflict began when 5 Arab countries invaded the newly formed State of Israel, sparking a war that resulted in displacement and suffering on all sides. Commemorating Nakba Day on May 15th not only aligns the PDSB with a narrative that objects to the creation of Israel as a state, but also coincides with Jewish Heritage Month, This juxtaposition is deeply troubling, as it perpetuates a narrative that erases Israel's legitimacy and undermines the connection between the Jewish people and their ancestral homeland. In addition, promoting Nakba Day in Peel schools provides a platform for the dissemination of one-sided narratives that vilify Israel and perpetuate harmful stereotypes about Jewish people. This not only threatens the safety of Jewish students and staff, but also contributes to a toxic environment that fosters hostility and division. This decision sets a dangerous precedent. It marks the first time a school board in Canada has officially adopted a day of significance that is in direct objection to the independence of a sovereign nation. As Canadians, we cherish our freedom and democracy, and it's concerning to see a public institution lend legitimacy to a narrative that seeks to undermine these core values. Furthermore, this decision appears to be in direct violation of the Peel District School Board's own policies. Policy 54 on equity and inclusive education, the PDSB's anti-racism policy, and Policy 51 on human rights emphasize the importance of creating an inclusive and respectful learning environment for all students. And I'll emphasize that, for all students. In that light, I urge the board to release all documents pertaining to the approval of Nakba Remembrance Day, so the public can see how the board could have possibly approved a day that is so inherently divisive, politicized, and fails to uphold the board's own commitment to equity and inclusivity. Moreover, it's baffling that while the Peel District School Board saw fit to include Nakba Remembrance Day on its calendar, it has rejected other significant events, such as, for example, the National Day of Remembrance for Victims of Terrorism, which was proclaimed nationally in 2005 and is observed nationwide with flags flown at half-mast, observed everywhere except apparently in Peel District schools. This inconsistency in PDSB decision-making further underscores the need for a thorough review of the board's decision-making process and priorities, because these decisions collectively undermine the integrity of the board. They introduce politics into our schools, and they turn school board meetings and classrooms into geopolitical battlefields instead of institutes of learning. Our Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce, has already on numerous occasions reiterated to school boards the need to keep politics and divisive ideologies out of schools. Specifically, he has stated the following. On October 10th, Minister Lecce sent a directive memo to school boards advising that, quote, there is no room for influence of personal opinions or personal worldviews in Ontario classrooms. On February 21st, Minister Lecce stated that, quote, my message to school boards is clear. There is no place for divisive ideologies. Every action they take should prioritize and support academic achievement. Most recently, last week, Minister Lecce spoke specifically about Peel, including Nakba Remembrance Day and its Days of Significance calendar. The minister stated that he, quote, made my expectations clear to all school boards that there is no room for influence of personal opinions or personal worldviews in Ontario classrooms. At a time when so many Canadians are divided, it is critical that schools bring people together, not further divide our society and students. The Peel District School Board should reverse their decision and leave politics outside of the classroom, end quote. As elected representatives entrusted with the education and well-being of our children, it is imperative that we heed his call and take immediate action to rectify this situation. I want to leave everyone here with one final thought. I'm joining you virtually today upon the strong recommendation from board staff. The board was unable to provide assurances as to my personal safety should I have chosen to attend today's meeting in person. Let's let that sink in for a minute. Couldn't guarantee my safety in a public Peel School Board building. Couldn't guarantee my safety while speaking to my elected representatives. This is an extremely serious problem that a parent can't speak to school board trustees about keeping politics out of school without there being a safety concern. This is led in part because the school board has allowed politics in schools and has turned our education system into the front lines of geopolitical battles. Yet, this is the reality of being Jewish in Peel today. Over the last several months, we have been forced to continually make those difficult choices to keep our families safe, a concept that previously seemed improbable in this country. Yet now, when I leave my home, when my kids go to school, when we visit our synagogue, we wonder, are we safe today? And I'm not just speaking in hyperbole. We have seen a dramatic increase in hate crimes against Jews across Ontario. The City of Toronto recently reported that of the 84 hate crimes confirmed since January, 56% have been anti-Semitic in nature. And a recent presentation by Peel Regional Police highlighted that Jews in Peel have been the subject of more hate-motivated crime than any other religious group. This despite only making up 0.2% of the Peel population. And we are seeing these increases in our schools as well. Jewish students have reported being assaulted in the hallways, chased by mobs through the schools, memes created about putting Jewish students in ovens, and chants of "Die Jew." Each of those examples have taken place over the last several months in a Peel school. I cannot emphasize enough the gravity of the situation before us today. This is not a time for further discussion or consultation. It is a time for decisive action to protect the safety and well-being of Jewish students and all students in Peel schools. Our schools should be places of learning and enlightenment, free from the influence of political agendas as clearly articulated by our Minister of Education. It is incumbent upon us as stewards of education to uphold the principles of equity, inclusivity, and respect for all. Let us not allow politics to infiltrate our classrooms and sow seeds of division among our students. I ask you today, will you be listening to our Minister of Education and reversing the decision on Nakba Remembrance Day? Will you return our schools to institutes of learning where all students and staff can have a safe educational environment? Now, I know you cannot directly answer these questions in response to this delegation, but tonight your actions will. Please reverse the decision to include Nakba Remembrance Day in the Days of Significance calendar and undertake a comprehensive review of your policies and decision-making to ensure that we keep politics and divisive ideologies out of our public schools. Thank you.
Thank you for the delegation. So I'll turn it now, as I said, over to trustees to have questions of clarification only. Do I have any questions of clarifications here in the room? I see none. Do I have any questions of clarification online? Seeing none, so the next step will, we now have to deal with the delegation. So I'd like to have someone put a motion on the floor to receive this delegation and send it to the director to respond to the delegate. So I have trustee Alves putting it on the floor, seconded by, let's go someone online, Susan Benjamin. All those in favor of moving this motion? So be it passed. Thank you again, Mr. Farber. So as you heard from the motion, what will happen is the director will respond to your delegation and specifically to as well to your questions that you had in the delegation. Okay, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So we'll move on to item 7.1. This will be the copyright and intellectual property policy presented by our superintendent, Envy. Right?
Acting legal counsel.
Sorry?
Acting legal counsel.
Acting legal counsel, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, good, thank you.
Well, thank you, Kathleen Walker, through you, Chair McDonald. Tonight, I am here to present the new copyright and intellectual property policy for the PDSB. Historically, the PDSB relied solely on its copyright procedure. While the procedure provided some guidance on copyright concerns, it fell short of meeting the governance needs of the PDSB when compared to other educational institutions with dedicated copyright policies. The absence of a copyright policy left the PDSB exposed to various risks, including potential legal disputes over copyright infringement, unauthorized use of copyright protected materials, and uncertainty about copyright ownership. This policy was developed through internal consultations and reviews of policies from other school boards to address the PDSB's specific needs. This policy aims to protect works created by the PDSB, ensuring that they remain the property of the PDSB, while also ensuring compliance with copyright laws. It facilitates responsible use of copyright-protected materials to enhance educational resources available to staff and students, thereby reducing the likelihood of copyright infringement claims and associated legal costs. By aligning PDSB's operations with other educational institutions and providing clear guidance for all stakeholders, this policy ensures an improved understanding of rights and responsibilities regarding the use of copyright-protected materials. The next step for PDSB staff is to continue monitoring the legal environment for compliance. As staff, we commit to protecting PDSB-created works and ensuring legal and ethical use of copyright-protected materials. Tonight, I am joined by General Counsel Lockyer, Superintendent Smith, and Coordinating Principal Mosconi, and we are happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Before we go to questions, I'd like to put it on the floor. So Trustee Kay McDonald, would you like to put this on the floor?
I will.
Thank you. And Trustee Bailey will second that. So now it's on the floor. Do I have any questions? I think I had Trustee Alves, you have a question?
Yes, more of a comment. Just want to commend Ms. Tugone for the presentation. Quite, it's always difficult to fill in and make these presentations, but want to thank you for that. And just note that I really appreciate this. I remember this conversation coming up when we were looking at the conversation around plagiarism and artificial intelligence. And I can't tell you how happy I was to receive this. So apologies, Mr. Chair, not much of a question, but just wanted to commend staff for providing this report. Very, very well done.
And I want to echo your comments. I think I appreciate this in addressing some of our concerns. Do we have any trustees online with any questions? Seeing none, I'll put this to a vote. All those in favor of this policy? Yep. So be it. It's passed. Thank you. So we'll move on to 7.2. So 7.2 is our electronic monitoring policy. And let me just pull this up. I got it here. Just have to skip the pages. So I'd like to introduce our Chief Information Officer, Antoine Haring, to present this electronic monitoring policy.
Thank you, Chair McDonald. And through you, we are seeking the committee's approval for the electronic monitoring policy that was presented to you. This is in compliance to the Employment Standards Act of 2022, which requires every organization that has more than 25 employees to have an electronic monitoring policy. In the meantime, after the Employment Standards Act came into place and required this to be in compliance, PDSB introduced an electronic monitoring procedure. In the meantime, until we develop, because the policies, as we all know, take a longer time to develop and go through the approval process, and as such, the procedures will ladder up to this policy, and the policy is currently in front of you for your review and approval. PDSB is committed to transparency, and the purpose of this policy is to inform employees of how and under what circumstances the PDSB may electronically monitor employees, but also to inform employees of the purposes for which the information obtained through the electronic monitoring may be used by PDSB. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. Let's put this on the floor. Trustee Benjamin, do you want to put this on the floor? And Trustee Alves, you want to second it? Thank you. So do we have any questions or comments? Yes, Trustee Alves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just out of a sense of curiosity, looking through some of the circumstances when we might do some electronic monitoring. One of them that came up was performance management, and another one was insurance, security, protection, so on. Are these kind of ad hoc? Like, would perhaps someone in a managerial position be logging on to, look at data just at will, or is it something that happens through, you know, a more formalized process like a performance review, something like that?
Thank you very much, Trustee Alves, and through you, Chair McDonald. No, absolutely not. As you could see, Trustee Alves, from 4.1. So 4.1 outlines who authorizes any electronic monitoring. It's only the Director of Education and their designate, which is the Chief Operating Officer and Associate Director of Operations and Equity. So if there is any monitoring that has to be conducted for a very valid reason, this has to be submitted to either the Director or the Chief Operating Officer. After they authorize it, then the extracts will be provided. But except for under these circumstances, nobody has access to that information.
That answers my question very well. No follow-up. Thank you so much. Good to know.
Thank you. I have online Trustee Kay McDonald.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I was just wondering if trustees' phones are monitored.
Thank you, Trustee McDonald, and through you, Chair. No, they are not monitored. No phones are monitored. We have about 1,200 mobile phones that are provided to staff and to the trustees across the board. They are managed through our mobile device management software, and they don't. There's no monitoring happening. If any of the individuals that have a phone provided by PDSB has their phone stolen or lost, they can inform us. We will put it in lost mode, and when we put it in lost mode, it will lock the phone, and it will show that this phone is locked and it's in lost mode. At that point in time, it will point, if the phone is on, it will point the location of that phone. If the phone is off, then we won't be able to do anything. But you will know, because if somebody puts the phone in lost mode without your consent and knowledge, you'll be able to see it on your phone, and it will show you that this phone was put in lost mode. And without that exception, there's nothing that can point anything on that.
And I'd like to also turn over to our governance council.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the question. And through you, Chair McDonald, I also just want to point out that this policy is applicable only to staff. It is not applicable to the trustees, as they are not employees. So this policy is towards that. Even though everything that Chief Information Officer Haroon did say is applicable, just wanted to make it abundantly clear that this policy is directed to staff only. Thank you.
Great, I appreciate that clarification.
Thank you, because actually it was kind of like half of my follow-up question. Because I was just going to say, if there's ever any situations where a trustee phone could be or would be monitored. So I'm assuming based on that our phones would not fall into this policy.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair McDonald, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So since we have the policy on board, we just now have to go to approve. Sorry.
I think the question's been answered.
Okay, question's been answered. Okay, so no further questions out there. So all those in favor of this policy?
Aye.
I see. Thank you. So we passed that. So we'll move on to 7.3, assessment, evaluation, and reporting policy. We have, I believe, Superintendent Hoppy online, who's going to present the policy. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. It is recommended that the Assessment, Evaluation, and Reporting Policy, Appendix A, be approved. The PDSB's existing Assessment, Evaluation, and Reporting Policy was written in 2018 and is currently scheduled for revision. The Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Department led the review and revision of the PDSB Assessment, Evaluation, and Reporting Policy. This revised policy ensures that equitable assessment practices are implemented consistently across PDSB schools. It ensures compliance with the Ontario Ministry of Education's policy for assessment, evaluation, and reporting as outlined in Growing Success 2010, Growing Success, the Kindergarten Addendum 2016. Learning for All, a Guide to Effective Assessment and Instruction for All Students. Kindergarten to Grade 12, 2013. Growing Success, the Mathematics Addendum, Grades 1 to 8, 2020. Growing Success, the Language Addendum, Grades 1 to 8, 2023, and Provincial Curriculum Documents. This policy aligns with the PDSB's commitment to assessment, evaluation, and reporting practices that disrupt systemic oppression, particularly for students who identify as First Nation, Métis, Inuit, African, Black, Afro-Caribbean, racialized, disabled, neurodiverse, gender diverse, Two-Spirit, and LGBTQIA+ students receiving special education support, multilingual learners in English and second language and English literacy development programs, and students from historically and currently marginalized groups. This policy is also informed by an environmental scan, including PDSB's anti-racism, equity, and inclusive education and human rights policies. The revised policy upholds the PDSB's commitment to equity and inclusion by requiring assessment practices that disrupt anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism, honor learner variability, including neurodiversity, and are transparent to students, parents/guardians, and families. The Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Department created an Elementary Assessment Steering Committee, EASC, and a Secondary Assessment Steering Committee, SASC, to gather continued feedback to inform the revision of the assessment, evaluation, and reporting policy. Members of the EASC and SASC include coordinating principals, instructional coordinators, and resource teachers from central PDSB departments, including curriculum, instruction and assessment, innovation and research, special education, social emotional learning and well-being, and representatives from elementary and secondary principals and vice principals associations, representatives from the elementary and secondary teachers unions, and 6 elementary and 6 secondary classroom teachers. In addition, this policy has undergone external consultation with the Special Education Advisory Committee and the Parent Involvement Committee and the Indigenous Education Council. It was also posted on the PDSB website for public consultation over the month of March, and 188 responses were received from members of the PDSB community. As a result of the consultation, the following updates have been made to the original draft. The purpose has been revised for clarity of language. Parents/guardians have been added to the application and scope. Designated early childhood educators, DECEs, have been added as instructional staff, and their duties have been added to the roles and responsibilities. The language has been updated to be more inclusive to neurodiverse students. The next step for the Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Department is to draft a revised elementary and secondary assessment, evaluation, and reporting procedures in alignment with the PDSB assessment policy. The operating procedures will outline how the policy will be implemented in relation to assessment practices, such as determining a grade/mark, absence of evidence, academic honesty, and final evaluations. It will also address assessment for English language learners and students with special education needs. Operating procedures will outline assessment and evaluation practices for programs with alternative expectations and include guidance on accommodations and modifications for neurodiverse learners. The operating procedures will also include reference to homework, which currently exists as a separate policy. Homework is a form of assessment for learning, and including it in the operating procedures brings it into alignment with other forms of assessment, such as for, as, and of learning. This integration will provide a more concise point of reference, as well as allow for greater synergy and alignment, and is a reason why it is recommended that the Homework Policy 70 be repealed. The operating procedure will be read by the end of the current 2023-24 school year. The communication plan for the rollout of the policy and accompanying operating procedures includes informing all instructional staff prior to the end of the school year so that staff can prepare well in advance and make the necessary adjustments to their assessment practices prior to the start of the school year. This ends my formal presentation, and I, along with the coordinating principal of secondary education, Sumbul Kakab, and instructional coordinator of assessment, Jillian Reed, are happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the introduction of the update to the assessment policy. So let's put it on the floor. Trustee Alves, do I have you put it on the floor? Seconded by Trustee Bailey. So do I have any questions or clarifications from the trustees? I'll ask one. While other people are thinking I had a call last week from a parent asking about this specific item, and we have the update. But when you look at some of the questions don't get answered in the policy. and there's obviously an operational piece behind that. So is that operational piece accessible for parents or for me to say, hey, have a look at this, maybe to answer your questions, or more of a policy is more general to a more specific conversation other than talking to the principal who is not recommended?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. So at this time, we are in the process of drafting the operating procedures, and operating procedures at this point are not available, but they will be available at a future date. But currently, they would not be able to access them. So as you suggested, the best point of reference for any specific questions that they have would be for them to reach out to the principal as well as to the teacher of their child.
Great, thank you. Now we have Trustee Bailey.
Through you, Chair. Just a small question. And it came down to the part where it was talking about homework during extended absences during that part of the document here. And it mentions that if you choose to take your children out of school other than the holidays, then the school cannot provide academic activities that replicate the missing learning that includes opportunities for students to demonstrate skills and engage in learning conversation. Is that really saying that if you miss it, you miss it, then there's no opportunity for you to catch up on that work or get alternate learning for that?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. So what it's saying is that in terms of the obligation that teachers have to provide instructional opportunities for students to be able to demonstrate their learning, their obligation is to provide that within the construct of the classroom. We understand that there are times in which students will need to be taken away from school, and we know that our educators are committed to the success of students, and more often than not, they do provide opportunities for students to be able to learn of their own volition, but they are not obliged to provide learning opportunities for students who are not in attendance with them. So that way, for example, if they are pulled away for, may it be a week, 2 weeks, a month, or 3 months, they are not obliged to now provide learning opportunities for students outside of the classroom. So oftentimes they may provide opportunities for students to be aware of what topics may be covered, and or they may provide opportunities for students to be able to be aware of what they are going to be missing, but for them to provide day-to-day instructional opportunities akin to what it is that the students would be experiencing if they were to be there, which is our hope that they would be there, they would not be missing school in person. That is not something that is the responsibility of the teachers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do get that it's not the responsibility of the teachers to provide the day-to-day learning. But is it somewhere there a responsibility of the teachers to provide the missed work, to say if a student or a family is being responsible and say, can I get it ahead of time? To say no. If a teacher says, no, I'm not giving it to you because I'm not required to do it, that's still within the scope, but that's not supporting student learning.
So I understood your statement, but I'm not sure of the question. Sorry, can you please repeat just for make sure I understand the question that you're asking?
This policy doesn't cover that. If a student is absent and if they're going to be absent for an extended time, it doesn't cover that. It is basically saying there is nothing for them. There's nothing, if the teacher refuses to do it, there's nothing, that's okay, because this policy covers that.
Thank you for the question and the clarification, and through you, Chair. So the policy does not get into those specifics, no. Those are pieces that would be addressed through the operating procedure, which is in the process of being developed. So that falls into the operations of implementing the policy. But the policy, you're correct, the policy does not provide those specifics.
And that's where I'm concerned, because when we're talking about student learning and student well-being and ensuring that they have it, why is the policy covering that? I'm just asking.
So just to clarify, why is the policy not, or why is the policy covering that? Sorry, I missed the last part.
Why is it not addressing that? Because that's an important one.
So thank you for the clarification again, and through you, Chair. So the operating procedures will provide those pieces I will invite my colleagues to be able to provide further clarification. But again, in terms of the policy itself, the policy provides the framework by which we would now provide those specifics in terms of our operating procedures. But I'll invite my colleagues to be able to provide any pieces that I may have missed.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to our governance council to respond.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair McDonald, the actual homework policy is being repealed. That policy is being repealed, is being replaced with the assessment, evaluation, and reporting policy. And further to the comments being made by Superintendent Hoppy, there will be further operating procedures developed under that. But I just want to be clear that if you're looking at the homework policy, that policy is being repealed. And it's the assessment, evaluation, and reporting policy that's replacing that. And then there'll be operating procedures, which we deal with homework in the operating procedures that are to come. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Trustee Elves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trustee Bailey's comments sparked a question in my mind. So we're repealing the homework policy, replacing it with the assessment and reporting policy. And we're saying, okay, but down the line will be an operational policy that will kind of deal with the homework aspect on a case by case. Do we want to amend this policy to include a basic provision to cover some kind of minimum requirement of coverage of students that have extended absences for XYZ period, or do we want to delay so we can read that and understand if there is adequate coverage? Because I'm actually just remembering a case I had with a parent who had a similar issue with an extended absence for her child, in that they had some difficulty requiring missing material.
Thank you, and for the question, and through you, Chair McDonald, the assessment, evaluation, and reporting policy is written from the principle-based assessment and how that's going to happen for each of the students. I think that if we get into those kinds of details, we've moved from the principle-based policy into the actual operations. And I don't think that's the intention of the policy as written now. And I do think that when we're dealing with issues of truly operational, I mean, what's happening with individual students and teachers and classrooms is truly operational. And I think we should be kept in the operating procedures. I think that and of course, I was not here at the time, but the homework policy itself was a reaction, I believe, that having read it and then read the now principle-based assessment, evaluation, and reporting policy, was a reaction to probably some parental input. And the trustees at the time thought that the homework policy might be a useful tool to assist with that particular parent concern. This approach with a policy and future operating procedures is more in keeping with the role of the board as a governance board and the role of administration in dealing with the actual day-to-day operations, and homework should be in an operating procedures type situation. The assessment, evaluation, and reporting policy does set out in a much more comprehensive way than the previous homework policy the full spectrum of assessment, and homework is a piece of that assessment, evaluation, and reporting. It is not the only thing that's involved with the assessment, evaluation, and reporting. By adding that into this policy at this time, we may be hindering an overall picture of assessment and evaluation, even for those students that may be away for extended periods of time, because it may be that the teacher has other opportunities to create different assessment models in order to meet those kinds of circumstances that may not be directly related to homework.
Thank you, General Counsel Lockyer. My question was more related to kind of just the minimum standard as a principle. So I'm wondering, in the event that students do have, as Trustee Bailey actually pointed out, in the event that a student needs to miss 3 months of school, the teacher won't, under this policy, be required to provide them with any learning. Is that how I'm understanding it, or will they be provided with a minimum requirement so that student can stay at pace or try their best to stay at pace with the class for their return?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair McDonald, I do believe that the policy, the way that it's set out now, does provide for that individual assessment. When we look at even 3.3A, assessment of learning, we're talking, it refers to students are engaged in the assessment process, monitor their learning. This is where you are creating the opportunity for individual opportunities for students who have extended absences perhaps would fit in. So there are already principles that exist within this policy without having to specifically say homework for extended absences. And I'd just be afraid that if we are getting too detailed, too operational, but there is the flexibility within the policy to cover those broad principles.
Yeah, that was my only concern, that we would see, the absence happen and the pushback, but as long as, if you're confident that the policy is written in a way where students will be supported for those extended absences, I'm totally happy to accept. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add your homework, it was, there was some minimum, how many minutes of homework, grade, and very prescriptive kind of approach to it. And, I have some parents who want more homework and some parents want less. So, yeah, it's operational. Thank you. Seeing no other questions, do I have Susan, Trustee Benjamin online? Do you have a question?
Thank you, through you, Chair. My questions were also related to homework, but most of them have been answered, so nothing from me now. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Benjamin. So, seeing no other questions, all those in favor of this policy? So passed. So we'll now move on to Indemnification of board employees policy, and we're going to use our acting legal counsel to present that.
Thank you. Through you, Chair McDonald. I am here to discuss the updated indemnification of employees policy for the PDSP. It is recommended that the previously combined indemnification policy be repealed, and that the updated indemnification of employees policy be recommended for approval by the Board of Trustees. The previously combined policy covered both employees and trustees, and it was last revised in 2018. However, after an internal review and comparison of indemnification practices in other school boards and municipalities, it became clear that the distinct roles of PDSP employees required a more dedicated policy. The separation of policies allows for more targeted provisions specific to the needs of employees alone. The updated policy reflects both the legal landscape and operational needs of the PDSP. It covers the cost of defending employees against claims arising from their professional duties. It also covers court awards and any settlements related to these claims. The key benefits of the updated policy include the following. Number one, it removes indemnification entirely for criminal charges, eliminating the option for the PDSP to retain legal counsel for employees facing these cases. This exclusion aligns with standard indemnification practices, ensuring that PDSP resources are focused on incidents directly related to professional duties. It introduces a condition for indemnification where claims initiated by employees against the PDSP or against the board are excluded from protection. This exclusion deters frivolous claims and reduces the risk of legal actions that would drain PDSP's resources. Number three, it also introduces a decision-making protocol for appeals, allowing the PDSP to determine whether to extend coverage for an appeal on a case-by-case basis. The next step for PDSP staff is to continue monitoring the legal environment for compliance. I am joined by General Counsel Lockyer, and we are happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to have Trustee Bailey put it on the floor, Trustee McDonald to second it. Any questions or comments? See no questions or comments, I'll go to a vote. All those in favor, sorry, oh yes, so there we go. Trustee Benjamin. You're muted, trustee Benjamin.
No, I don't have any questions. I was just approving.
You were ready to vote. Okay, sorry. Okay. Okay, with your hands up, by the way, so that's why I thought it was there. So,
Maybe I should read.
yeah. So let's do this one more time. All those in favor of this policy? So passed. Thank you. Thank you. We'll now move on to the similar policy 7.5, identification of trustee policy by our acting legal counsel.
Thank you. Through you, Chair McDonald. Again, it is recommended that the previously combined indemnification policy be repealed and that the new indemnification of trustees policy be recommended for approval by the Board of Trustees. The previously combined policy, while comprehensive, covered both trustees and employees. However, the unique roles and responsibilities of trustees as elected members required a dedicated policy. Unlike the previously combined policy, this new policy is specifically designed for trustees. The key features of the new policy include the following. Number one, trustees directly involved in a matter are not permitted to vote on the decision to provide indemnity and retain legal counsel. This ensures impartiality and promotes accountability, allowing only unaffected trustees to participate in the voting process. Number two, the policy addresses and complies with legal frameworks relevant to trustees, including the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. While the policy does not provide for the defense or representation of trustees facing claims under this act, it allows for reimbursement of legal if a trustee, having hired external legal counsel, has not violated specific sections of the act related to disclosure of interest. This upholds transparency and ethical conduct while safeguarding the PDSP from potential conflicts and liabilities. By addressing specific legal standards applicable to trustees, the policy ensures compliance with relevant regulations and reduces potential legal risks for the PDSP. I'm joined by General Counsel Law here, and we are here to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Let's put that on the floor. First with trustee K. McDonald, and by trustee Benjamin. So do we have any questions or comments around this policy since it relates to us as trustees? Seeing no hands or questions, I'd like to put this to a vote. All those in favor of passing this policy? Aye, so we have it passed. Thank you. And that concludes our items from reports to staff. So now we'll go on to the next parts on our agenda. Item 8 is communication. We have no communication, but we do have item 9, a trustee motion for consideration. The motion is, submitted by myself. So I guess I should put it on the floor. So I'll put it on the floor. Do I have a seconder? Trustee Alves. So the motion be it resolved that the Peel Board staff provide a report to the Governance and Policy Committee before the end of June 2024 on student cell phone use in school. So like all motions, I will just introduce this motion. I've had a lot of feedback. I was certainly at a meeting, I think last month, with another trustee talking about the children's use of cell phones and how difficult it is and scary it was. I'm glad my kids have grown up. How these phones, not just being addictive, but how they're getting access to things that aren't age appropriate, how there can be very illegal actions going on to allure them to other kind of behaviors that translate to actions and behaviors in schools. And so I thought it would be good to have a report brought to the board talking about student cell phone and then allow the trustees to decide if actions or policies or things need to be done from that. So I'll open it up to any comments or questions on the motion, and then we vote. So do we have any comments or questions? Trustee Alves?
Thank you, Chairman. I think that this is a wonderful motion. Glad to support it. Like my colleagues and like yourself, I've had some interesting conversations with parents and educators alike, not only regarding some of the scary stuff that students are using cell phones for and their access to age and appropriate material, but also how they're being used in classrooms, how they're distracting from education and learning. So sharing those concerns, I think having the report come from staff will provide us with a little bit of the research that we need to perhaps look at a policy that would help regulate this. So very much glad to support it. I think it's on we do. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Trustee Bailey.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just a question. When you say a report back on the usage of cell phone in classroom, is it going to be a little bit more specific on the scope of what you're asking for? Does that seem kind of broad?
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I will say that I talked to our legal governance council to allow it to be broad and allow the operations group, the board, staff to provide a good feedback and allow and not constrain them, and then from that report, then as trustees maybe have a better understanding. We all have our own personal feedback of what's going on. And so I wanted to just get a report. But if you feel free that we would like to amend some specifics to it, I'm open to, and we can vote through an amendments and to get any specifics.
I don't have a specific. My concern is that this is just, you can go any which way on this. It kind of feels like, okay, let's go hunting. And we will create a policy based on what we find.
And I can understand that from just reading the motion. I think you would come from that perspective. But I've been talking to administrators, I've talked to superintendents, I've talked all the way up to the director. They're quite aware of the challenges that schools are faced, as you are quite aware, and they I think I don't have to direct them in this. That was my understanding. So I feel I had to direct them in that. But if you feel that we should, then more than welcome to add something. Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Trustee Promoli is online.
Yeah, and thank you, Chair, so much for bringing this forward. I know we were together at that meeting at Brookmead, and we've had this conversation a number of times over the last year and a half now. So I'm really glad that we're having the chance now to bring this forward as a chance for further exploration about how we can do whatever we can do to make sure that we're ensuring that we're handling this responsibly. I know it's a big challenge, and this is something that I think we've heard often from our schools, and we've seen the challenges that students are dealing with. So I am looking forward to hearing back to hear what staff has to say about it, and we'll see what we can do to, if there's a way to improve situations, let's look for it. So yeah, just a thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Trustee Promoli. And it was great to both of us to hear that conversation by Paul Davis, who is very renowned in supporting, proper cell phone use, not just for students, but staff, and more importantly for parents. And we attended the parent session, even though he did the day session with the students. But it was pretty scary to hear comments that grade 3 class all has social media on their phone when it's really, social media is if you're under 13, it's not appropriate for loading social media. Any other questions or comments? I want to close the debate then to the motion, just to say, I forgot my book. Since that meeting, I saw on the TV and then subsequent on another show, this author of a book by Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. And I would strongly recommend everyone read that book from a parent to an educator to a policymaker. He opened my eyes as well to Paul Davis to how, and this is a psychologist who's looked at data driven since 2010 when social media has got involved in shaping our children's, as he calls it, how the great rewiring of children, how it's really affected things. And he has some clear 4 recommendations in his book on how we should be doing things, and I recommend the read. So, see no further any comments by myself to close the debate. We'll go to a vote. So all those in favor of passing this motion? Okay.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. That still passes. So thank you, trustee colleagues. All items that are passed on this evening will be going to the board as a whole, where they will vote and make it official on policies or motions. So we'll move on to item 10, communications, which we have none. No, item 11, trustee notice of motion, which we have no notices for the next meeting. So I'm going to move to adjournment. So trustee Benjamin, do you want to put it on the floor for adjournment? Trustee Bailey, a second. All those in favor of adjournment? So be it, we're adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone.